Come inside the brood and take a look. So this is our brooder. This is where we brood our chicks. From the incubator, the machines, we bring them here. And as you can see, our brooder is made of plywood around the wall. And between the plywood and the iron sheet, we have sawdust. Sawdust inside the sawdust between the wall and the plywood. The purpose of that is because at times it's too cold. So when it's hot during the day, the sawdust will absorb the heat, and during the night it releases that heat for the chicks to use to get warmth. On our floor we're using sawdust. Sawdust as the litter on the floor, and as you can see, we did not choose the round brooders. Instead we turned the whole house into a brooder. So we have plywood all round instead of the small round brooders. The reason why we did that is because at times we have too many chicks. We can't make the small brooders because the small brooders cannot carry more than 300 chicks for us in this room. On top here we have day old. They just hatched today. As you can see, we have magazine all over the floor. The reason why we use magazine on the floor is because when the chicks are still day old, when they're just from the machine, they can't differentiate between the food and the sawdust. So most of them will go for the sawdust and begin feeding on the sawdust, which will cause a lot of problems in their digestive system. Here we have birds of different ages. Just like I said, these ones are day old. Here we have 2 weeks old birds. We have a few 3 weeks old here. They were just taken yesterday, and a few of them remained. We have a week old here. So what do you need to do in a brooder? A brooder is a section where you brood the chicks. You give them extra heat, you give them special treatment. Feeding and watering is different from the rest of the flock, that is the grown-up birds.
As you can see, the brooder is in round shape in the chicken coop. We make it round because you realize that chicks likes to come together in corners. We try as much as possible to avoid corners in the brooder, because when they come together so many in the corner, some of them may be stepped on and they may die. So you make it around. This is simple plywood. You buy plywood from your nearest hardware, you cut it into 2, and then you put it around. You make sure that the corners are circle shaped and not square, so that we do not have sharp corners. You stick it around your brooder or whatever your chicken coop where you'll be putting your chicks. Now, your chicken coop needs to have ventilation. Ventilation is a must. You need to treat your chicks the way you treat yourself or your children. One reason for ventilation is we have sawdust in the chicken coop. There's a lot of, it's a bit dusty in the chicken coop, if you realize this. Now, you need, as you can see, we have ventilation on this side of the chicken coop. And it usually advise that you put, you can use paper-like to cover it, a polythene or something, as long as it is something that you can cover or uncover. When it is too hot, you'll have to keep it open, and especially in here it's too hot because of the heat bulbs. We keep them on full time, so it is open. When it gets too cold, especially at night or when it rains, you can drop down the pepper so that it is covered and a lot of the cold does not get into the chicken coop. So you need to have something that you can regulate yourself. You can open it and you can close it so that at some point it's not too hot, or at some point it's not too cold.
We use this infrared bulbs inside this brooder. This is what we use as the source of the heat. As you can see, it's made of a very long wire that is flexible. That means you can extend it or you can raise it a little bit if necessary. How the height to put the light will depend on the behavior of the chicks. That is, when it's too cold for the chicks, the heat is not enough, you'll see them collect around the heat. That means you should lower the heat bulb a little bit so the heat gets enough for the chicks. When it's too hot, they will move away from the heat, and that means you need to raise the heat bulb a little bit so that it doesn't interfere with them.
Sometimes as farmers, you can find that using the heat bulbs can be quite expensive, or that you do not have electricity in your chicken coop. So I will try to give you alternatives or whatever you can use in your chicken coop, because your chicks really require warmth, or else you will end up opening a mortuary next to your chicken coop, because the chicks will really die because of the coldness. Now, what we have here is a lamp. This is not only used for romantic dates on the tables, but you can use this as well to heat your chicken coop. This can be used 1 to 15 birds. So depending on the number of birds that you have, you will have to use a lot of this. When you're using this, make sure you have ventilation, because there's some gases that this produces. So your coop must have ventilation to allow the flow of air in your chicken coop. Alternatively, you can use this. The olden days we used to use this for cooking, but now you can also use this as a brooding pot. As you can see, it has holes, and you use it with a stand. You will use this with a stand, so it can be a bit high so that your chicks do not go under it and get burnt to death. We advise farmers to use the charcoal briquettes, because if you use the normal charcoal, you have to wake up once or twice every night to change the charcoal on this. This can be used 1 to 70 birds, around 1 to 70 chicks in a brooder. Now, you can as well use this. You can use this as a hat, but alternatively, you can use the brooding jiko. This is what we call a brooding jiko. This can serve so many birds for you. Now, we give alternatives to using electricity, because electricity can be quite costly. When you have the briquettes, this can be assembled at your local market. When you have the briquettes, you can you put the charcoal in here, the charcoal briquettes. You cover with this, and after covering that, you will use this. This is what is used to spread the heat in the chicken coop. This can as well serve very many birds in your coop. Depending on the number of birds you have, depending on the number of chicks you have, you can use 2 of this for around 200 birds, meaning 1 to 100. Now, you will cover this on the top, so that any heat that comes from the jiko will be spread with this. And then what you will need to put on top of that is this. You will cover this. This will control the amount of oxygen going in, and this will regulate the amount of charcoal that is burning. So when you reduce this, when you close the lid, put a little this, it will burn slowly. When you open it wider, because sometimes the cold can be too much, you open it and more oxygen will go in, and there'll be more heat produced, thus the chicken coop will remain warm. So we have given you alternatives. Don't be afraid that you only have to use the heat bulbs. It might be very expensive for you. In future you can use any of that, but as for now, if you're unable to maintain the use of, or if you do not have a backup, I'll also tell you that you can also just have them in your farm as a backup, because sometimes electricity is not constant. So when you don't have electricity, your chicks do not need to die of cold or the bad weather. So you can use this as a backup, or you can use them as a main. So you have so many alternatives. There is no excuse for you not to be able to have a brooder in your chicken coop.
When it's too hot for the chicks, you can also observe the behavior of the chicks. When it's too hot, you'll see them like opening their mouths and gasping for air. They're like breathing heavily. That means it's too much. They're trying to cool their bodies. You can also observe them opening their wings wide so that they try to cool their body while flapping their wings.
We're going to talk a little bit about feeding the chicks in the brooder. Chicks at different age need to be given a different amount of feeds. You can invest in this. You can use this to check the amount of feeds you give them. I'm going to read for you the amount of feeds you can give them according to the weeks. At week 1, the chicks need 12 grams per bird. At week 2, 18 grams per bird. At week 3, 25. Week 4, 31. Week 5, 36, week 6, 41, week 7, 45, and week 8, 49 grams per each bird that you have in your chicken coop. Make sure every morning and afternoon, or rather evening, you change the drinks and the feeds. You wash the drinkers and the feeders. You wash them every morning and every evening because chicks can get infection very easily. So you wash the feeders and the drinkers with a disinfectant. You can use BioSafe. You mix it in water. Clean the drinkers, clean the feeders every morning and every afternoon. At week 3, the birds have grown up enough. They're ready to leave the brooders. They're strong enough. They do not require, of course, they require a warm place, but they do not necessarily need the heat bulbs. They do not necessarily need the excess heat from the jikos, whatever you're using to warm up your bird. So at week 3, your birds can leave the brooder and join the other flocks. How to stop your chicks from dying? Every farmer desires 100% survival of chicks once he or she has bought and put them in a brooding house. Losses will, however, almost always occur, especially during the first 2 weeks of life. A mortality of 1 to 5% may be considered normal, but anything above 5% is abnormal and requires immediate intervention to stop further losses. Indeed, some of the causes can actually wipe out the entire flock. Some of the common causes of mortality in brooding chicks include 1. Genetic factors. There are many lethal gene mutations in birds, most of which cause death during the incubation period. A few, such as congenital loco and congenital tremors, will cause the death of chicks within a week of hatching. To prevent this, farmers are advised to purchase day-old chicks from reputable farms who select against such genes. Management factors. The most common errors that farmers commit include 1. High brooding temperatures. This results into 2 major problems, namely dehydration. The body of a young chick comprises of about 70% water. If temperatures remain continuously high, it results in loss of water from the body, leading to dehydration. A water loss of about 10% will cause death due to circulatory failure. Pasting. This is when high temperatures in the brooder house causes pasting or sticking of feces around the vent, leading to blockage and ultimately death of chicks. Low brooding temperature causes chilling and pneumonia, which kills chicks in high numbers. Dead chicks on postmortem show pale or blue lungs in color. Low brooding temperature makes the chicks to huddle together to keep warm and maintain body temperature. This further leads to smothering and death. To prevent the effects of temperature, a farmer should adjust the brooding temperature 24 hours before putting the chicks in the brooding room and during the brooding period. A farmer should also try to maintain the normal recommended temperature throughout the brooding period and evenly in the brooding areas. Feed-related factors include feed poisoning such as fungal, this is mold, contamination or feed contaminated by toxic substances, especially tanning found in sawdust, and excess salt in water, as well as toxic gases which include ammonia, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide. This should be avoided through use of proper feeding and use of clean water, as well as proper litter management with regular mixing and removal to avoid accumulation of toxic gases in the brooder room. Adequate ventilation in the house is also very important. We're going to talk about diseases. Newly hatched chicks do not have a high immunity level. If hygiene is therefore not maintained, a number of diseases responsible for early chick mortality will thrive. Among the most prevalent of these diseases are 1. Omphalitis, also referred to as mushy chick disease or navel ill. This is an infection of the navel characterized by inflamed skin in the navel area, soft, flabby and distended abdomen, pasting of the vent and foul smell on the carcass on opening due to an absorbed yolk. Affected chicks appear depressed with drooping heads. This is a bacterial disease and can spread very fast, becoming responsible for high losses in the flock of chicks. 2. We have the polarum. This is an acute infectious and fatal bacterial disease of chicks characterized by ruffled feathers, white diarrhea, labored breathing, chipping, and death. It is also common to find dead chicks without showing any signs of disease. We also have the salmonellosis. This is a condition referring to a group of acute, rapidly spreading disease affecting all ages. It is characterized by rise in body temperature, septimacea, presence. This is the presence of infectious organisms in the blood. Omphalitis, hepatitis, which is inflammation of the liver, and enlargement of the spleen and death. When this affects the young chicks, it can be responsible for a very high death rate in the brooder room. We also have the colibacillosis. This is a serious and acute bacterial disease affecting the blood system and can affect all ages of chicken, with high prevalence and mortalities in newly hatched chicks. Strict biosecurity or hygiene is one of the major methods of preventing the above diseases. The houses, water and feed equipment, and the entire surrounding of the brooder must be kept clean and free from all contamination. Other factors to consider are 1. Floor, water, feeder space must be adequate to avoid overcrowding, starvation, and dampness of the litter, which facilitate multiplication of pathogenic microorganisms and further deaths. Proper handling of chicks during vaccination and other procedures to avoid injuries which predispose chicks to contamination and subsequent infections. Maintaining proper humidity to avoid dampness in the brooder room. Dampness facilitates accumulation of toxic gases and growth of infectious microorganisms. Construction of brooder houses should also be proper to keep away predators such as rats, dogs, and cats. Proper ventilation is necessary to regulate temperature and remove carbon dioxide, ammonia, other gases, moisture, dust, and odor. Fresh air should be introduced uniformly, mixed well with house air, and circulated properly throughout the brooder house. Light is an important factor during brooding because chick activity is greater in bright light intensity than in low light intensity. During brooding, the light should be at the brightest intensity to encourage chick activity, assisting them to locate the feed and the water. Once they learn where the feed and water are located, around 7 to 10 days of age, the light intensity and duration can and should be reduced.